You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis. I'm your host for BioTalk, where we interview and chat with entrepreneurs within the BioHealth Capital Region in the nation and internationally. And we're lucky to have an entrepreneur today who's built a successful business within the BioHealth Capital Region. But also, I happen to be talking to him, even though his business is in Frederick, Maryland, he's in San Francisco today. So we're talking across the country to Dr. Luis Alvarez, who's the founder of Theradaptive. Luis, welcome to BioTalk.
Rich, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great to hear. I've read a lot about what you are doing, some exciting things and some new funding that's come into the company, which the listeners are going to be very excited to hear about, and also your background. So generally what we do, Luis, is rather than me introduce you, nobody can do it better than yourself. So we're going to let you do a little self-introduction about those things that actually were a little earlier in your background and history, leading you to where you are today as the founder of Theradaptive, and really what the inspiration was for that. So, Luis, take it away and give us a little of your biographical background.
Thanks, Rich. It's a great opportunity to share our story. So, as you mentioned, I have a career in the military. So I served 20 years in the Army, and midway through that was serving in Iraq. And based on some of the injuries I saw coming out of there and conversations with doctors at Walter Reed, decided to refocus my work on tissue regeneration. So I went back to MIT to work on this problem, and in the process developed a platform technology that years later I would spin out and start Theradaptive based on. So since that time, I've been working on building the team and the process to get a therapeutic into the clinic to help any cases where you have tissue regeneration needs and that sort of thing. So it's been an interesting trajectory to start from the military problem, now leading to a very commercially significant solution set that we've developed within the company.
Thanks for that brief introduction. Let me drill down just a little bit. You basically spent 20 years in the military and saw a lot of different things that a lot of us probably would not care to see. But at the same time, after that 20 years in the military, you made a decision to get involved at MIT. How did you make that decision to get involved academically and go to MIT?
Well, that really was something that I had always enjoyed doing and was drawn towards tech and entrepreneurship. So before I went into what you would call the normal Army assignment, I did do 2 years at MIT that the Army allowed me to do. But at the time, the Army didn't allow you to complete a PhD, so I waited until I had further years in the service. And then at that time, I went back to finish a doctorate. But the desire to go back and actually the specific problem that I worked on in the PhD program was driven by what I saw in the military. So in some sense, it was a blessing in disguise to have to wait to go back, because then I had a problem in my hands that I could say I could actually focus on this.
And then, MIT is world renowned for what it does for people in the entrepreneurial world. How did you find that experience at MIT to help support your idea for creating a company?
It's a fertile ground because you're surrounded by people who are also trying to solve important problems. You have access to resources and experts and really a community. I think really the aspect of the community of technology thinkers is the most valuable thing. And so in that context, you can find the things you need to develop and solve the problem that you're working on. For me, it was how do you regenerate tissue specifically, and more specifically, actually, how do you regenerate bone tissue when it's injured in combat and not able to heal itself, which ultimately leads to amputation. So the original problem was to solve this problem of delayed amputation by coming up with a way of regenerating bone tissue. And that's MIT really provided the fertile ground for that.
And then, you had a PhD in this area of research, but you probably didn't have much of a business background. So how did you come up with the idea to form a company? And with the scientific background, how did you marry that with the business skills that were necessary to create a business?
Well, it's actually interesting because after starting this work at MIT, then in the Army, I continued in service, and in this case in R&D, research and development, and what's called acquisition, medical acquisition. And there, what I experienced was, I managed many pharmaceutical development programs, helped to manage the regenerative medicine program for the DoD, and was able to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in a sense was a kind of a business school for Regen Med Tech and was able to basically make notes of whenever I saw something I thought, well, this is good, or this is something I should avoid. In that process, I think what I needed to start a company with that type of information.
And then talk a little bit about your intellectual property. Where did it evolve from? Were there any licenses involved, or is it all something that's your own innovation? Talk a little bit about the history of the science.
Yeah, so the intellectual property for this was a side project from my original thesis. And because I was on active duty at the time, the Army owns the IP. So the original IP that formed the company was something I was able to license, from the Army. Since that time, we have much further expanded the IP, and the rest of it, about 7 patent families worth, is actually wholly owned by Theradaptive now. But it was a good experience to actually go through a licensing process with the U.S. Army.
And then, a lot of people they know about licensing from like NIH and other institutions, but we haven't had many people on BioTalk who have licensed technology from the DoD or the Army. So talk a little bit about that process and what is the expectation of DoD and the Army from this license that you have negotiated with them. And are they expecting any returns, or they just want to see that science get in there and do good to help people in the military?
Yeah, that's a great question. So anybody in uniform who invents something, was the case with me, that IP is assigned to the Department of Defense or the U.S. Army. So if you want to take a license on that, it's a very easy process. I would say it's even easier than some university technology licensing offices. They are motivated by a desire to get new capability into the hands of warfighters, to make capability available, not so much to see a return or have any financial terms. There are some, but I would say they're favorable, highly competitive compared to the rest of the market. And also, because it is so, in a sense, not as well known, I would say there's a lot of tech that the Army has on its shelf that probably would benefit from somebody looking at more closely, because there is a lot of IP that's not been licensed yet.
And based on your experience, we did this with the NIH a long time ago and created something called Entrepreneurs in Residence program, because they have all of this IP sitting on their shelf, but they're reactive. They wait for somebody to knock on the door rather than being proactive. So it's similar to you. You were being proactive at addressing them rather than them going out and searching for people to commercialize technology that was on the shelf.
Well, in my case, because I was a lead inventor, I knew what I wanted. So I would say that was easier. In the case of companies maybe looking for new tech in other areas, diagnostics, other therapeutics, for example, the Army does have an active outreach out of Fort Detrick. I know I'll call out Barry Datloff, who leads some of their efforts. They're actually going to be at the Bio conference in Boston this summer, and we'll have a booth there. So yeah, people are interested, they can go out. So the Army does some outreach, but perhaps, the industry is not as well versed or familiar with that particular source of IP, but it's out there.
Yeah, and since BioHealth Innovations based in Maryland, we've interacted with Barry and Fort Detrick, and we know it's a very good program. So we'll also be in Boston. So maybe the three of us, Barry, Lewis, and Rich, can have a beer or something up in Boston during Bio this summer.
We'll have Barry pay for that.
Okay. That sounds good to me. Well, it's interesting. Thank you for getting us up to speed as to how the technology evolved. Let's talk a lot earlier about the formation, early days, and how targeted biologic delivery led to your platform and how it's evolved to where you are today.
So the platform really started as an idea. As I said before, this problem that service members face when they have an extremity injury, they come back to the States. The limb is maybe salvaged because of the medical care they receive en route. But if they have a condition or an outcome where the tissue does not heal, for example, the bone, then eventually the doctor will come to your bedside and say, hey, you have 2 choices. You can keep your limb, but you'll be bedridden or in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. Or we can amputate, fit you for a prosthetic, and you'll walk again. So which way do you want to go? Imagine having that question. So that's a question I wanted to eliminate. And the original problem really was, how do you deliver therapeutics with precision, anatomical precision, so that you can regenerate the tissue and not have to worry about this? In doing so, that platform actually applies to any case where you want to deliver any recombinant protein biologic with precision. So now we've actually started an oncology program using the same technology, because really the question is, there are therapeutics out there that are quite powerful, but they have to be administered systemically, and you have unwanted side effects. If you had a way to deliver it with targeted tech, like what we have, you can get away from the side effects and actually have the therapeutic effect locally.
So you're talking about sort of a targeted effect. So there are many challenges in delivering biologics into the site, a very specific site. And from what I'm gathering, your technology helps address that problem about targeted delivery.
Exactly right. When you make a protein therapeutic, you really don't have a way of telling that protein or controlling that protein where is it going to go in the body because you administer it systemically. So we have a platform that lets you now say, I want to deliver this only to the tumor or to a lymph node or only to an injury site around a bone. And now you can do that without having to worry about how you're going to do that.
And basically, you're talking about oncology now, which is a little bit different than really regeneration, bone regeneration. So with your platform technology, one of the most difficult things for entrepreneurs is how do you balance your pipeline or your portfolio of science and technologies? And you're in two different areas, distinct different areas that might be on the same platform. How do you manage the difference in what you're trying to do in your regeneration area versus the oncology area right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. As a small company early on, and since really the very beginning, we focused on one problem, and that was bone. So that gave us the ability to raise capital, to also get non-dilutive funding from the Department of Defense, and advance that program to the point where we're going to be entering the clinic in a few months here. So once you're at that stage, I think as a company, you've exercised the discipline you need to advance a program. Now you can begin to think about how you extend your platform. So that's what we've done. Our oncology product is much earlier stage, but we're at a point now where we can have, without a lot of risk, just begin to diversify.
And then, as you mentioned, it all takes funding. And as a first-time entrepreneur with a new business, how did you get the company funded initially? And then talk a little about the different various stages of funding that you've had over the last 6-7 years to get you where you are today in your most recent DoD award.
I would say the road for us has been quite bootstrappy, difficult, because we started off with grant funding from the Department of Defense, a career development award through the congressionally directed medical research program, which are highly competitive grants. So in the early days, that's what we did. We competed for grant work. Now we had a very small team. We were, looking for deals on the internet for lab equipment, just like a normal startup trying to get things off the ground. And as we gained momentum, then we started attracting private financing, so venture financing, and we found early investors to come in as well. So to date, we've raised something like 20 million in equity financing and about 24 million between the state of Maryland and the Department of Defense. Majority of that being Department of Defense, but the state of Maryland had an important role to play in the early days through the Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund programs.
Super. Yeah, a lot of people aren't aware of that. You want to talk a little bit more about that Maryland Stem Cell program, Lewis, because I think their budget's around 10 to 12 million a year, and it's competitive just like what you had to go through for the military funding. So explain a little bit about for other people that we have in the BioHealth Capital Region that might be interested in trying to apply for some of that funding.
Sure. So it's a great program, and I think it's one of the best in the country when you look at state-run programs. So the Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund has a number of sub-programs that focus on commercialization. We got 2 commercialization awards from them. They have early stage scientist awards. Now they created a new program in manufacturing. So we are in the process now of going through the evaluation for that process. So it takes you through a whole life cycle from early idea stage through commercialization, translation, through to manufacturing. So that's one aspect of it. And there's a whole series of programs under that I would encourage folks to look at. We also received investment from the Maryland TEDCO Venture Fund twice. And so those 2 kinds of funding really have helped enable us to, one, stay in Maryland and grow the business in Frederick. So we went from a 2-person company, now we're approaching 30 people, and all in Maryland. So I think for a relatively small investment, now that investment is going to pay dividends locally by creating an ecosystem and a new company that's going to grow within the state.
Well, I would imagine TEDCO and Maryland look at you as a poster child and will be glad that they see this as a commercial for the state of Maryland and what you've done with Theradaptive in growing your business here.
I don't want to let the secret out of the bag, but I think anywhere from Frederick to call it Bethesda, there's a corridor there of talent where the ratio of the cost of space and equipment and people relative to the talent is just unique and not found anywhere else.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about why Frederick was selected as the location and the headquarters for your business.
Well, I was assigned to Fort Detrick during the last few years of my service. And it was there that we started incubating the concept of the company. And then Frederick has an incubator run by Kathy Brady called FITCI.
FITCI?
That was FITCI, the Frederick Innovation Technology Center.
Right.
And that incubator was very important for us because it gave us several years of growth in a low threat, low risk environment, and did what an incubator does. And then it allowed us to graduate out, and we just found a space nearby there in Frederick. And people love Frederick. It's a reverse commute. So everyone has been happy. And thankfully, we've not had, any departures from the company. They all want to stay and work.
That's great. My CFO, Lynn Brisbane, lives in Frederick, and she's going to love this because she's very proud of the Frederick area. So she'll be one of your ardent listeners to this, Louis. So, the thing that I really admire is that you have been very resourceful, taking advantage of those programs and non-dilutive funding programs to get your company to where you are today. Probably being able to preserve a little bit more equity because of the non-dilutive funding than what a traditional company would have gone through to have raised about $44 million where you're at. So congratulations on that. One other thing I'll ask you about Maryland programs, since you have raised some equity capital, did you take advantage of the Maryland Biotechnology Tax Credit Program at all for any of the seed investment that you raised?
Yes, actually, we're looking at that now and conducting a study on how to leverage that. But that's
Excellent.
Another great program.
So once you do that, then you've almost done full circle. And the other thing is, have you gone after any SBIR grants in addition to sort of the DoD funding that you've received?
Yes, we've received one SBIR grant as a prime, and that was also very helpful in the early days. I would say that the SBIR program, extremely successful in its entire history. In some sense, I think it could be slightly revitalized to increase the number of topics that are available in this area of regenerative medicine or targeted therapeutics. So if there are any listeners out there that can impact policy for the SBIR programs, I would encourage more topics in this space.
In addition to the listeners, BioHealth Innovation has a team to help early stage companies apply for SBIR grants. And we've helped over 200 companies and have a 50% success rate. So I see you making notes right now, Louis, because that's one of the benefits of doing a podcast is that I'm learning things from you and you might be learning some things from me, but you've been so resourceful. There isn't much I can teach you about those kind of programs available in Maryland, but hey, we just identified another one that might be beneficial to you.
I'll be calling you, Rick.
That's okay. So let's talk a little bit more about where you are in the status of your science and your technology moving forward. Let's talk a little bit about the clinical stage and the regulatory approvals. And, there's breakthrough technologies and breakthrough regulatory approvals that you can get. Where are you with your core technology around your bone regeneration?
Yeah, so the original problem that we were going after was, of course, bone regeneration to prevent amputations. But we found that spinal injury and disc degeneration was another area that could use the same product at the same dose. So our lead indication now is spinal fusion to treat disc degeneration. It's actually it's the number one problem for removal from military service. It's just intractable lower back pain during times of peace. So it's also relevant for service members. In that indication, the FDA has granted us 3 breakthrough device designations, more than any other company for spine. And the FDA has also given us guidance that we can enroll directly in a phase 2. So that has saved us a lot of time on the clinical path.
Well, congratulations there. That's very difficult. And then because of your relationship with DoD, have you been able to leverage any of the medical institutions DoD has, like Walter Reed or anything, to look at some of your clinical trials?
We have counted with a number of physicians at Walter Reed who serve on our physician advisory board. And we would look to them for our phase 3 as a study site. That's all driven by the number of procedures for that specific surgery that are done there. And I think there are a fewer number of spinal fusion procedures, but my wish and goal is that if there were ever a conflict, and nobody really wants this, and there is a need for regeneration of bone resulting from extremity injury, that we would make this available to the entire military medical system, including Walter Reed.
Well, probably the VA would be a major area for this, right?
Absolutely. VA is an important one.
Yep. Great. Well, I think that there's some things that the listeners will be interested in learning about, sort of the engineering and the manufacturing of really material binding protein variants, which might not be traditional engineering and manufacturing, and some of the challenges and complexities that go with that. You want to talk to our listeners a little bit about that, Lewis?
Sure. So, let's say you have a protein that has a function that you want to exert in the body. The question that we ask is, how do we re-engineer the sequence of that protein so that it retains that original function, but gains a new function, and that is to bind to a carrier material, whether it's a scaffold that you implant or an injectable microspheres, whatever it is. So that part of the engineering really falls within a field called protein engineering. So we do a lot of protein engineering, both in silico and then in vitro screenings. And we've developed our own method to combine the two to create an informed process to drive evolution of new variants that allows us to find ones that adhere to both. One, preserve their original function, and two, gain this ability to bind to materials.
And then based on these being unique processes, how has it been that you've been able to grow your company to 30 people now? How difficult is it to find the specialized expertise that you need? And are you able to find most of that expertise in the region, or do you have to go national or international to get some of the expertise you need?
95% of the people that have exactly the expertise we need already lived and worked within 20 miles of where we are. So it's remarkable.
That is amazing. I mean, what a advertisement for building a talent pool around a very sophisticated technology-based company and being able to find all of that talent almost all within Maryland.
Absolutely. I mean, if you really look at it, if you take a drive from Bethesda to Frederick, you're going to cross several federal institutes, NIH, NIST, you'll have the FDA, you have all the biotech companies along the way. So it's a very rich corridor.
Yes, it is. And we promote that. But one of the other things, and since you have experience in Boston, you understand what the cost dynamics and quality of life are in Boston. And then one of the things that we talk about in the BioHealth Capital Region is really the quality of life as well as the affordability of trying to build a technology company versus being in San Francisco or Boston or New York City. And can you give a little perspective on that and how you're growing your business and understanding the differences and the dynamics between the different life science regions in the country?
Yes. So Boston, of course, has Kendall Square, which is like the Fifth Avenue of biotech. And it is very appealing in that you have a lot of other companies nearby, major universities and so on. But it's a difficult calculation when you actually sit down and say, is the benefit I'm getting from being here worth the additional cost, not just in real estate equipment and salaries, but taxes and other things? And for some technologies, that may not be the case. And I think the same applies to, of course, San Francisco or San Diego. For us, it made more sense, and we were able to actually find people more easily in Frederick. And of course, I don't want to say anything bad about Kendall Square. I go there often. I have a lot of friends who actually work there and have started companies, and it works for them. But I would say for us and technology similar to ours, I think it would be worth a look to stay in Maryland.
Yeah. And I'm sure that the Maryland Department of Commerce and Frederick Chamber of Commerce would love to have you be a testimonial for them, which you are. And I'm sure they'll promote this BioTalk. We're talking to Luis Alvarez, who's the founder of Theradaptive, an emerging technology company located in Frederick, Maryland, but has been very successful in his last 7 years in advancing the science and actually growing the pipeline of technology. So one of the other things that I'd like to address is really the indications and the areas you think your platform is going to be able to address. You mentioned spinal, you mentioned potentially oncology. Are there specific oncology areas that you might focus on? Are there other ortho areas? Something I read might be related to dental. I'm just trying to figure out what that would be. But talk about what the diversity of your platform is and the potential areas it might impact.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we look at it two ways. One is within molecule diversity. So we can, for example, take our lead product for bone regeneration and actually use it in spine, in orthopedics, in joint repair, and in dental at the same dose, same product, everything the same, except the kit size might be smaller. So for the investment that you make for a single therapeutic development, you actually can just do label expansion sideways in the sense that you go to new indications. As diverse as dental. Dental and spine, you would think are not connected. But so that's what we're doing. Actually, we have a second program in dental, which I didn't mention, using the same molecule. So there's diversity within molecule. So you get label expansion. And then there's diversity across the material binding characteristics. So, for example, in oncology, a lot of applications where you want to stimulate the immune system locally without having systemic activation of the immune system. And that systemic activation of the immune system is really what has caused many drugs to fail, drugs that would have been promising. So we're diversifying in that direction where you want to have a very local effect, local immune effect, for example. And that's what our lead program in oncology is focused on, is local immune stimulation.
And one of the things that you mentioned earlier was how you would like to see them improve availability and diversity in some of the SBIR funding. But as you're aware, there's 27 different research institutes, and each of those has a disease-specific area that their mission is focused on. So when you list all of these different application areas, there are many different institutes that you might have the ability to discuss funding or partnerships with. Have you actually explored any CRADAs or cooperative research and development agreements with anybody within the NIH or the DoD as well?
Yeah, you're right, Rich. There are opportunities to collaborate. So we did have for a time a collaboration with the Institute of Surgical Research in San Antonio, Texas, which is a Department of Defense laboratory. And that went very well for us, and actually is what kickstarted our bone regeneration program. We are going to look now to establish similar ones in oncology and with the NIH. We have not had a lot of interactions with the NIH. It's a gap area for us that we're looking to fill. So we're looking to the future to do that with those agencies.
Well, one of the things I'll offer to you is we have 15 entrepreneurs in residence that reside within the NIH, but they're on our payroll, and they work with small businesses throughout the United States that the NIH funds. And in order for you to get exposure to them, we have something called EIR Day. And on April the 19th, we do it once a month and let 3 or 4 companies get an hour in front of them, no charge. And they give instantaneous feedback to the entrepreneurs and the companies about ideas of what they can do clinically, regulatory, reimbursement wise, or actually fundraising or non-dilutive funding. So you might mark that down. We'll do some follow-up on this, but I think we can give you some exposure to some people who know NIH extremely well. They know it probably as well as you know DoD. You could probably educate them on some of the DoD areas for entrepreneurs to pursue while we try to give you a little more insights into the NIH.
It's a deal. I'm there.
Okay. I'm glad that Marcus McCabe, your PR firm, introduced us to one another, and we probably should have met many years ago, but at least there's no time like the present. If you had to go back and do it all over again, Louis, is there anything you would change in your journey that you've had to get to where you are today?
It's a great question. I think about that often. If I were reincarnated, what would I do? I wouldn't change the journey, but I would accelerate the points in time when I made certain decisions. And I think, of course, the delays that we experience in our life, important decisions when you say to yourself, oh, why didn't I decide to do that sooner, is due to either lack of knowledge or uncertainty, lack of confidence. And so I think if I had to do it again with the knowledge I have now, I would accelerate certain decisions that I thought might be risky or I was uncertain about.
I guess, one of the things that is almost past us now, but did the pandemic have any negative effects on your ability during that couple-year period where we were going through the challenges of the pandemic?
Yes, it did, especially on the supply chain side. We were just kicking off our scale up for manufacturing. And that's where the pandemic really had an impact for us. So it was hard to source a lot of materials. That set us back maybe about 12 months.
And one other thing that's just happened recently was sort of the Silicon Valley Bank fiasco. And as an entrepreneurial company, it has to manage its cash as it's growing. Has anything that's happened over the last couple of weeks changed the manner in which your cash management will be managed over the next couple of years?
Fortunately, we used a different bank, but we did have some cash there close to the insured limit. So it was really not any real exposure, but that disrupted our operations that we were running through the bank. So now we're shifting over to JP Morgan.
Oh, okay. Who might also be able to help you from an investment banking perspective or an IPO perspective or fundraising capital. And I'm sure you might be aware of it, but they just created a $750 million venture fund. And we have a JP Morgan representative located in Gaithersburg, which we could make an introduction to you. And he's out there looking for companies within the BioHealth Capital Region to work with. So that's another thing we can connect on as a follow-up here.
That would be great. Thank you so much. Sometimes calamities have a way of actually uncovering the treasure on the other side.
You're right. So what is it that you would like to convey to our listeners that I haven't asked you or other entrepreneurs out there related to Theradaptive and your company at this stage, Louis?
I would say that we're very excited about this idea of targeted and localized delivery, and that traditionally the field maybe has not thought along those lines. So if there's a way that you think that this technology could enhance or transform a therapeutic that right now is not ready for the clinic, that we would be very open and willing to explore that with you. And we're a highly collaborative company. We have a number of partnerships. So we're very much supportive of the ecosystem and want to see if we can add value, whether or not there's anything in it for us. We just want to advance the technology forward.
Well, I think this has been really one of the more informative BioTalk podcasts I've had an opportunity to do, Louis. And I compliment you on what you've done to leverage all the resources available to grow your company right now. And also what you've done in Frederick and in Maryland to take advantage of the great programs. And isn't it amazing to have Fort Detrick as a resource right in your home headquarters in Frederick, Maryland, which you evolved out of or graduated out of basically, and found a way to grow a business in your own backyard after your military experience. I mean, it's really, a book should be written about this.
I agree with you, Rich, and happy to start on that project together. Right?
Well, you got your PR guy is Marcus. He works on books. We don't do books. We just try to help entrepreneurial companies like yourself grow, Louis. So I want to thank you for being on BioTalk today. And we've been talking with Louis Alvarez, the founder of Theradaptive, Frederick, Maryland-based emerging technology company that's on its way to becoming very successful. And we wish you the best of luck, and we're going to stay in touch. And I know that there's a number of follow-up items that we're going to continue to talk about after this podcast, Louis.
Rich, thank you so much. And I really look forward to continuing the conversations.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.